It was one of those gray, cold afternoons when the wind cuts right through you, no matter how tightly you pull your coat around yourself. The city streets were buzzing with life, but for James, each step felt heavier than the last. His worn-out sneakers slapped against the pavement, carrying him toward the park bench where he often sat to think. In his hands, wrapped in crinkled paper, was the only food he had for the day, a simple sandwich. Not much, but to him, it was all he could afford. James had been through a lot in the past year. Once, he had a decent job, a small apartment, and enough to provide comfortably for his little daughter, Lily. But when the company he worked for downsized, he found himself without a paycheck. The savings he had scraped together vanished faster than he could have imagined. Rent, utilities, groceries, and medical bills took it all. Soon, his life became a daily battle to keep food on the table. He tried everything, odd jobs, overnight shifts, even helping strangers carry groceries for tips, but the struggle didn't seem to end. What hurt him the most wasn't his own hunger, but the thought of Lily ever feeling empty inside. He had promised himself that no matter how hard life got, she would never feel unloved or forgotten. That day, James was planning to eat his small sandwich quietly, then head to the library where it was warm. But as he sat on the bench, he heard the soft sound of crying. Looking to his left, he saw two children huddled together near the fountain. They couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. Their clothes were thin, their cheeks red from the cold, and their little hands were trembling. He hesitated for a moment. Approaching strangers wasn't always safe, but something in the way the smaller child was wiping his eyes with his sleeve broke James's heart. He stood and walked toward them. "Hey there," he said gently, crouching down so he wouldn't tower over them. "Are you two okay?" The older child, a girl with messy brown hair, looked at him with wary eyes. "We're fine," she mumbled, though her voice shook. James noticed their thin backpacks and realized they might be homeless. His gaze fell to his sandwich, his only meal. For a brief moment, the thought of keeping it flickered through his mind. After all, he hadn't eaten all day. But looking back at those children, he knew what he had to do. "You hungry?" he asked softly. The boy's eyes widened. He didn't say anything, but the look on his face was enough. James slowly unwrapped the sandwich and tore it in half. Then he hesitated again and broke it into 3 pieces instead, handing 2 to the children and keeping 1 small piece for himself. "Here," he said. "It's not much, but it'll help." The girl took her piece cautiously, as if she wasn't sure whether to trust him. The boy grabbed his with both hands and took a huge bite. James sat beside them, chewing slowly on his small portion. For a while, they ate in silence, the only sound the crunch of lettuce and the rustle of the sandwich paper. Finally, the boy wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and looked up at James. "Why'd you give us your food?" he asked quietly. James shrugged. "Because you needed it more than I did." The boy studied him for a moment, then leaned closer and whispered, "You're my hero." The words caught James completely off guard. He felt a lump rising in his throat. He smiled faintly, blinking back tears. "Nah, I'm just someone who knows what it's like to be hungry," he replied. They sat together for a while longer, and eventually, James learned their names, Emily and Ryan. Their parents had separated months ago, and they'd been staying in shelters, sometimes sleeping in the bus station when they couldn't get a bed. They had been walking around the city all day, hoping to find something to eat. James wished he could do more for them. He dug into his pocket and pulled out the last few coins he had, barely enough for a cup of coffee. "Here," he said, handing the coins to Emily. "You can use this to get something warm to drink." The girl's eyes softened. "Thank you," she said quietly. As the sun began to set, James walked them to the nearest shelter he knew, speaking to the volunteer at the door to make sure they got in safely. He lingered for a moment, watching them disappear inside, feeling both a strange emptiness and a quiet sense of peace. That night, James went to sleep hungry. But in his heart, he carried the warmth of knowing he had made a difference, if only for one cold day in the lives of 2 lost children. The next morning, as he walked past the same park bench, James saw Emily and Ryan again. This time, they weren't alone. A kind woman, one of the shelter volunteers, was with them, and she smiled when she saw him. "So you're the man they told me about," she said. "They wouldn't stop talking about how you gave them your sandwich." James felt embarrassed. "It was nothing," he mumbled. "It wasn't nothing," she said firmly. "It meant the world to them." Over the next few weeks, James found himself visiting the shelter often. He helped serve meals, played board games with the kids, and read stories to them at night. In return, the shelter staff helped him apply for assistance programs and connect with job opportunities. Slowly, things began to change. One day, James walked into the shelter carrying a small bag of groceries he'd bought with the money from his first paycheck at a new job. Emily and Ryan spotted him from across the room and came running, their faces lit up with joy. "James!" Ryan shouted, throwing his arms around him. "We saved you a seat." James laughed, hugging them both tightly. The shelter wasn't just a place to keep warm anymore, it had become a place filled with people who cared. And James had learned that sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can create ripples that change lives. Years later, when James had a stable home and a steady job, he often thought back to that cold afternoon in the park. That single sandwich had been all he had to give, but it had built a bridge between him and two children who reminded him why compassion matters. Life would never be perfect, there would always be struggles and hard days, but James knew one thing for certain: the moments we choose to give, even when we have little, are the moments that truly define who we are. Some stories don't end with grand gestures or perfect happy endings. Sometimes they end with something quieter, but no less powerful: the memory of a child's whisper in the cold air, "You're my hero," and the knowledge that, for someone in need, you were exactly that. Because heroes aren't just the ones who wear capes or save the day in dramatic ways. Sometimes they're just ordinary people with empty pockets but open hearts, willing to share the last thing they have with someone who needs it more. And in that moment, they shine brighter than anyone could imagine.